You just paid $15 for a movie ticket. If you bought it on opening weekend for the biggest film of the year, here is what your theater will never tell you. It keeps barely a third of your money. The rest, around 10 of your $15, goes straight back to the studio that made the movie right off the top. And here is the strange part. Go back on a random Tuesday 3 weeks later, buy a ticket to the same film, and that same theater quietly keeps almost twice as much. Same seat, same popcorn smell, and you had no way of knowing which version you just walked into. Either way, the theater you are sitting in barely makes a cent on the film you came to see, which raises a very strange question. If the movie is not the business, then what is? And once you see the answer, you will never look at that $8 popcorn the same way again. Because a movie theater is one of the great magic tricks in retail. It sells you a ticket to a thing it makes almost no money on, and then quietly runs 3 completely different businesses off to the side while you sit in the dark and stare at the screen. By the end of this video, you will see all 3. A concession stand that is not a snack bar, but the single most profitable business in the entire building. A machine that sells your attention and your identity to strangers while you wait for the trailers to end. And a room you are sitting in that the theater does not even own. Along the way, you will meet a company that lost hundreds of millions of dollars trying to give you unlimited movies, and a boss who saved his theater chain not by selling tickets, but by selling his own stock to the very fans buying his popcorn. So let me start where the money actually goes. Your ticket. When you hand over $15, you assume the theater keeps most of it. It does not. It pays a cutback to the studio called film rental, and that cut is brutal at the start. For a huge opening weekend, the studio commonly takes 60 to 70% of every ticket, sometimes more. The theater is left with the crumbs. It only claws its way back to roughly a 50-50 split by keeping the film on screen for weeks, as the studio's cut slowly slides down. So the theater actually makes more money per ticket on a small, quiet indie film than it does on the giant blockbuster everyone lined up for. The tentpole is the trap. It fills the seats and hands most of the ticket to Hollywood. And when a studio has a big enough film, it does not just take the money, it dictates the terms. When Star Wars: The Last Jedi came out, the Wall Street Journal reported that Disney demanded 65% of every ticket every single week the film played. It ordered theaters to show it in their biggest auditorium for a full 4 weeks. And it added a penalty, pushing its cut to 70% if a theater dared move the movie to a smaller screen. Think about what that means for a small-town theater with one good screen. For a month, its best room is essentially rented out to Disney, handing back 2/3 of every ticket. That is not a partnership. That is a toll booth, and the studio owns the road. Now, you might assume it was always like this, that studios and theaters were always separate empires forced to negotiate. They were not. And to understand how the studio got this much power over the room you are sitting in, you have to go back further than you would think. Stay with me, because this one law is the setup for everything. The popcorn empire, the company that ended in a criminal courtroom over a subscription, and the boss who saved his theaters by selling stock to his own fans. For the first half of the 20th century, the studio simply owned the theaters outright. They made the movie and they owned the room it played in, and they used that power to force independent theaters to take their duds along with their hits. Then, in 1948, the Supreme Court looked at these exact same businesses and called them an illegal monopoly. For the next 70 years, if you bought a ticket anywhere in America, the studio that made the film was legally barred from owning the room you sat in. And then, quietly, in 2020, one court decision tore that wall down, and you almost certainly never heard about it. The old rule was gone, and the wall between studio and screen came down. Watch what happened next. Netflix bought a historic theater in Hollywood. Amazon bought an entire studio for over $8 billion and started pushing its own films into cinemas. The companies that make the movies are quietly buying back the very rooms the law spent 70 years keeping them out of. And there is one more thing the theater lost, and it is the scariest one. For 100 years, the theater held one card the studio truly needed: the window. Around 90 days, that is how long a new movie stayed invisible everywhere except the theater. Then the pandemic hit. Universal skipped theaters completely and put a film called Trolls World Tour straight onto a $20 home rental. 3 weeks later, $100 million. And the studio kept about 80 cents of every one of those dollars because there was no theater in the middle taking a cut. When a Universal executive publicly bragged about doing this forever, the boss of the biggest theater chain in America fired back with a letter vowing to never show a single Universal film again. It was war, and here is how it ended. They signed a deal. The 90-day window collapsed to just 17 days. The theater did not win. It simply agreed to a smaller cut of the studio's home rental money and gave up the one thing that ever made it special. So the theater does not own the movie. It does not own the window. It does not even really own the ticket, which is exactly why it has to make its money somewhere else. 3 somewheres, in fact. Start with the one you can see, the concession stand. And forget the tired line that popcorn is overpriced. Look at the actual numbers, because they are staggering. This is not a guess. In its own annual filings, the biggest theater chain in America reports that the food it costs to make its snacks is only about 17 cents of every dollar it charges you for them. That means the concession stand runs at a gross margin north of 80%. Popcorn is the star of the show, mostly cheap corn, air, and salt, sold at the price of a small meal, at a markup commonly estimated at around 8 to 1. And here is the key. On that snack, unlike your ticket, the theater keeps every single cent. No studio takes a cut of your popcorn. So even though concessions are only about a third of what the theater takes in, they can be close to half or more of its actual profit. Now, the rule about no outside food makes sense. That rule is not about crumbs on the floor. It is armed security for the only genuinely profitable business in the building. And the theaters have learned to squeeze it in ways you might not have noticed. The gap between the medium and the large popcorn is tiny, sometimes $1 or less, because the extra corn costs them almost nothing. The whole menu is designed to nudge you to the giant size where the margin is fattest. And then, a couple of years ago, they discovered something even better than popcorn: the bucket it comes in. When Dune Part 2 arrived, one chain sold a bizarre collectible popcorn bucket for $25. It went viral overnight, and people were reselling it online for many times the price. That one weird bucket kicked off an arms race. That same chain now runs a full collectible merchandise line, buckets and cups tied to every blockbuster, that went from earning nothing a few years ago to a reported $65 million a year. For a recent animated release, it ordered over 500,000 pieces of merchandise and sold 2/3 of them in 3 days. And in the boldest move of all, that chain started selling its own branded popcorn on the shelves at Walmart, trying to make money on the popcorn without even needing the movie. They finally admitted the truth out loud. The popcorn was never the side business, it is the main event. That is business number 1, the thing you can see. Business number 2, you cannot, because it is happening to you, not in front of you. It is your attention and then your identity. First, the attention. Those 20-odd minutes of ads that play before the trailers even start are not the theater filling time. There is an entire separate company whose whole job is selling the eyeballs of everyone sitting in that dark room to advertisers. It controls the ads on the vast majority of American movie screens, and here is the quiet tell. Even as fewer people go to the movies than before the pandemic, that company has figured out how to make more advertising money per person in the seats than it did back in 2019. Fewer bodies squeezed harder. They even ran that business into bankruptcy and restructured it, and the ads never stopped for a single show. But selling your attention for 20 minutes is small time compared to selling your identity forever. And this is where a real cautionary tale comes in. A few years ago, a company called MoviePass tried to flip the whole model. For under $10 a month, it would let you see unlimited movies. It sounded insane, and it was. It hemorrhaged money, reportedly hundreds of millions of dollars, and collapsed. But the story did not end in failure. It ended in a criminal courtroom. Prosecutors charged its leaders with fraud, with lying to investors about a business that could never work. Its chief executive pleaded guilty. Its chairman pleaded guilty. What looked like a generous deal for movie fans was, according to the government, a scheme that cost investors a fortune. And yet the survivors learned the real lesson hidden inside the wreckage. The money was never in the $10 subscription. It was in the data. Because the moment you sign up for a movie theater's loyalty program, You stop being an anonymous face in the dark and become a name, an email, a credit card, and a complete history of everything you watch. One giant chain now has around 39 million member households in its program. In a recent year, those members made up more than half of everyone who walked through its doors. It knows by name who you are, what you like, and exactly how to sell you the next ticket and the next bucket. The subscription was never the product. You are. Which brings us to business number 3, and it is the one hiding in plain sight. Look up. That room you are sitting in, the theater very often does not own it. It rents it. There is a whole category of specialized landlords whose entire business is buying up movie theaters and leasing them back to the chains that run them. One of them owns close to 150 theater properties, and these are not casual leases. They are long-term contracts worth billions of dollars, rent that has to be paid every month whether the auditorium is packed or completely empty. The largest chain in the country is sitting on around $4 billion in future lease payments alone. So picture the full stack. The studio takes most of the ticket. The landlord takes the rent on the building. The ad company takes your attention on the way in. And the only thing left, the only pile of money the theater gets to keep almost all of, is the $8 popcorn in your hand. None of this is on your receipt. You walk out thinking you paid for a movie. You never see the studio taking its cut, the landlord collecting the rent, or the ad company selling your attention and your name to the highest bidder. You only ever notice the popcorn. So what could actually bring a machine this strange crashing down? There is really one answer, and it has a name and a face. Meet Aron, the boss of AMC, the largest theater chain on Earth. By the pandemic, his company was buried in debt and, by his own account, days away from bankruptcy more than once. And then something no one could have scripted happened. An army of small investors online decided to pump up AMC's stock as a game, calling themselves apes. Maybe you were one of them. And Aron did the one thing a normal executive would never dare. He leaned all the way in. He printed and sold new stock into that frenzy again and again, raising well over $2 billion in the first year and more than $1 billion on top of that as the mania peaked. He raised so much money selling shares that he ran out of the shares he was legally allowed to sell, so he invented a whole new kind of unit just to mint more. It worked. It kept the doors open. But sit with what that actually means. For a stretch there, the most reliable money the largest movie chain in the world made was not from tickets and not even from popcorn. It was from selling its own stock to its own fans. The real threat to a theater was never streaming exactly. It is a mountain of debt, around $4 billion of it, plus another $4 billion in leases, sitting on top of a room full of seats that fewer people fill every year. The math is brutal. Domestic box office has slid from over $11 billion before the pandemic to under $9 billion, and it has not fully come back. But to be fair, I have to give you the other side, because it is real. When the movie is big enough, when it becomes an event, the whole machine roars back to life. When Barbie and Oppenheimer opened on the same weekend and the internet turned it into a cultural moment, the two films pulled in around $2.5 billion together, and the seats were full. When Taylor Swift released her concert film, the theater chains cut the studios out entirely and distributed it themselves, and it made over $250 million, the biggest concert film in history. And the premium giant screen formats just had their best year ever. So theatrical is not dead. It is concentrating. It is becoming a place you go a few times a year for the events too big to watch on your couch, and pay a premium for the privilege. The popcorn margin never moved. The landlord always got paid. And the moment a big enough movie arrives, the crowds come back and buy the $8 bucket without a second thought. So here is the only question that actually matters. Now you know where the money really goes. The popcorn stand that is the real company. The machine quietly selling your attention and your name. The landlord collecting rent on the dark room you are sitting in. So next time you are standing at that counter, what do? Do you walk past the popcorn, sit down with nothing, and keep the $8 the entire building is engineered to take from you? Or do you buy the large anyway because the movie is about to start, and honestly, it just would not feel like the movies without it? Be honest with me. Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know.